And I'm here. Welcome back. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to that profound graveyard of sound. The Dead Hours presents The Murder Corner. Because honestly, who doesn't love a good spooky sound effect? It usually involves xylophones because, as we all know, that is the soundtrack of Skeletons, officially. The official instrument of Skeletons everywhere, all the way around. I am the villainous crypt-kicking xylophone virtuoso and future ghost with the most, Vivian Noir. Here I am, me. Hi, how you doing? So let me get my windows all in order here. Hello to everybody who is in the chat, who is watching. Hi to, I'm just going to try to pick the names as I see them. Hey, Dianetics. Hey, Lab. Hey, Custard. Hey, Cassie. Hey, Dazzler. Hey, DJ. Hey, Janine. Hi, Daniel. Hi, I saw Max earlier, but I know she's watching on her TV. Hello to Dazzler. And then Sam just popped in. Who else did I miss? There's somebody else. I'm sure there's somebody else that I missed. Hi to everyone I've missed. I try to remember, and I'm trying to watch them as they go down the chat, but of course it's a little delayed. So Scientology is kind of one of those things that for a long time people were afraid to talk about just because during the 90s and things, the church had a very good stranglehold on their PR game. So they threatened lawsuits, they would dox people, they would send private detectives after people. Since a lot of the major and senior members have left the church in I'd say the last 10 years or so, that kind of hold on no information getting out has really slipped as of recently. So as many of you notice, it is back in the news. Scientology is back in the news again because of Danny Masterson, Hyde, walking human trash fire, and former Hyde on that 70s show. He is a Scientologist, very famously, and he is also on trial for sexual assault. So he is being charged with 3 counts of rape in former relationships, and that's why Scientology has been kind of brought back into the news because of him. So I would expect a lot of discussions about the church and the way they do things going forward, because they do cover up a lot of stuff for celebrities. If anyone's watched any or is familiar with any of the documentaries or is familiar with watching or hearing any of the podcasts and stuff like that, they are famous for covering up messes for people who do them, who pay them and are loyal to them. Dantex, he was Hyde in that 70s show. So yeah, it's they will famously sweep things under the rug and make bad things, disappear or make people not talk, which again, their stranglehold kind of not as strong anymore. So it's fallen away by the wayside. Anyways, I did something a little different with the video. I wanted to go with kind of because the graphic and the stuff that I've seen, it's very it reminds me it's very 50s, retro sci-fi. So I always kind of I wanted to do something 50s retro, right? So I did it. I'm going to let you watch it and let you be the judge. And of course I'll pop in and out to make some commentary because there's a lot. There's a lot here, you guys. November 18th, 1995 in Clearwater, Florida seemed like any typical day, complete with the typical day-to-day misfortunes like a minor fender bender. The paramedics responded but found both drivers ambulatory and started to leave the scene. That was until one of them, a woman named Lisa McPherson, started to remove all of her clothing and walk naked down the center of the street. When asked why she was doing this, she simply responded with, "I need help. I need to talk to someone." 17 days later, 36-year-old Lisa McPherson was dead. She died not in a hospital or a medical facility, but in a dirty hotel room under the care of a religious organization which has drawn scrutiny for its secrecy, abuse, and fraudulent claims for the past 30 years. Open the pod bay doors and get ready to go clear, because this is where the story of the Church of Scientology begins. America has had a long-standing fascination with outliers beginning their own offbeat religions or cults. But it's not every day that one gets started directly out of the pages of astounding science fiction magazine. The prophet who sowed the seeds of this controversial movement was born Lafayette Ronald Hubbard on March 13, 1911, in the humble farmland of Nebraska. He struggled as a writer, but it didn't stop him from spinning tall tales. So, first point of order, those pants, them short pants, am I right? Anyways, fashion icon. I can't even say that with a straight face. So, he was a struggling writer, and by struggling writer, I mean, when I say that, I mean he wasn't very successful. He wrote a lot, though, and I do mean a fucking lot. It qualifies as a fuck ton. He still holds the Guinness World Record for most amount of books published. Like, doesn't mean they were good. We're talking, quantity over quality here. So he used to write for magazines, and back then, writers used to get paid a penny a word. So you had to write a fuck ton to make any kind of money. But obviously, he couldn't really sell too many stories because they weren't that good to begin with. I'm not being judgmental. I'm just being factual at this point. So you can still find some of his writing. Some of it has been republished and repackaged as with some of modern covers on him and stuff. But yeah, he still holds the Guinness Book of World Records for most books published. Also, he apparently would write so much. The story goes that he would write so much and with such a fervor that he would sweat, and sweat would like drip onto his typewriter, which my first thought, ew, gross. Ugh. It's like, dude, like, why are you straining so hard? You're typing. Like, are you okay? Do you need to see a doctor? That's not normal. You're not running laps. You're not doing cardio. You're typing. Anyways, intensity. Continue me. He claimed that he was a blood brother of the Blackfoot Indians, but there was no such ceremony. He also claimed to be a nuclear physicist, but dropped out of college in pursuit of a civil engineering degree, and that he was a war hero. He wasn't that either. During his service in the U.S. Navy, he was placed in command of 2 ships, but was summarily removed from command both times. The remainder of his enlisted time was spent in a hospital for a variety of ailments. But as much of an appalling con artist as he was in many ways, it's impossible not to be awed by the magnitude of his story, one that could be barely imagined by the most creative writer in Hollywood. A struggling science fiction writer becomes the leader of a billion-dollar cult, commands his own private navy, and dies while on the run from the U.S. government. It sounds stranger than fiction, and even harder to believe at face value. But that was where Scientology stood out from other movements. It grew out of the self-help movement where popular titles like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie were no doubt an influence on Hubbard's own cobbled-together manual, Dianetics. Dianetics itself reads like a patchwork of other popular psychoanalytic theories, repackaged and repurposed specifically for the layperson. With a good deal borrowed directly from Sigmund Freud's abreaction therapy and Alfred Korzybski's general semantics, as well as techniques on hypnosis, one might wonder what about the content was original at all. The fact is, the information contained in between the covers of Dianetics was nothing new, but the way it was packaged and presented was, and that proved all too appealing in the post-war psychoanalytic boom. And auditing, aka Hubbard's patented form of self-counseling, meant that rather than pay a professional therapist for months or years of treatment for what may turn out to be an inconclusive diagnosis, all a faithful Dianetics practitioner needed was a copy of the book and a friend to co-audit with. The process of auditing was laid out expressly in the text in order to tame what Hubbard called the emotional or reactive mind. It was this that was the source of all fears and ailments. The purging of emotions from the reactive mind, a concept he'd actually written about in prior science fiction short stories, was done via a process of a series of probing and self-reflective questions intended to help the adherent step entirely into their logical or analytical mind. I almost forgot I was on mute. Thanks. The edit part where I changed the pages. I tried to mix it up. I didn't want to do that like bleed through too much because I thought it might be a little too repetitive. But so the terms that you guys are going to hear, and you've probably heard before if you are familiar with Scientology or know any of the background on it, terms like reactive mind, terms like clear, a lot of these terms were honestly recycled by Hubbard. He had used these concepts in short stories he had written and had published. So basically he cherry-picked out concepts and ideas and theories that were, again, pure science fiction, and rolled them into at first, a self-help module. And like, that would be literally like if George R.R. Martin picked words out of Game of Thrones and decided to do a TED Talk. Like none of it makes any fucking sense. Like, it's banana boat. And we haven't even gotten into the really banana boat stuff yet. So let's get into that. Continue me. These negative emotions and trauma responses were what Hubbard called engrams, and served something like a recording or a memory of a negative or traumatic event. In order to reduce the impact of these memories, an auditor will use a device called an e-meter, which is essentially 1/3 of a polygraph machine. It is constructed of 2 cans that the querent holds, and these carry an undetectable amount of current into the machine. According to Scientology, the machine measures your amount of mental mass, or the density of your thoughts. And yes, you are seeing that correctly. That is a very early John Travolta being audited. He is, of course, one of the more famous celebrities associated with Scientology. There are a lot of them. I'll get into why that is later. But at a later point during Scientology's kind of like after, like in the 90s and stuff, when he was a lot more active, they insisted on recording people's auditing sessions, which, as you can imagine, if people are asking the questions that you saw earlier, like, have you ever committed a crime? Have you ever assaulted anybody? Have you ever lied to someone? All of these things are written down. So all of these responses are recorded and kept by the auditors. And once you audit so many times, you're just having files upon files upon files of these answered questions and these really secret things that have happened to people. So I guess at one point they had set up cameras so they could videotape everyone's auditing sessions. And of course, yeah, they can use it for blackmail later, right? Which they say it's not blackmail because they don't ask for money. That's not how this works. But Travolta refused. He was like, I do not want to be videotaped while in auditing sessions. And they basically lied and said, okay, cool. We're not going to do that. And you can audit in your hotel room if you feel more comfortable. To which immediately then they went and installed secret cameras in his hotel room and videotaped him anyway. So, continue me. As the current runs through your body, this density and the amount of resistance is shown on the meter via a needle on a gauge. Questions about negative emotions and experiences are asked repeatedly by the auditor until the needle begins to show less of a response, and in this way, the engram is discharged. This is a very similar concept to Freudian therapy, but where Scientology and Dianetics differed was that it pushed further and delved deeper into people's experiences, which at times resulted in suggested or false memories that the meter read as real incidents that occurred. This was then chalked up as trauma accumulated in a past life. Once purged entirely of these experiences over a lengthy process of time, adherents would move out of their reactive mind and... I gotta go back for a second. That was literally L. Ron Hubbard using an e-meter on a tomato. On a tomato. What the fuck? Like, why? What? Are you... Do you need to check to see if it has, like, you know, bad memories before you make a fucking salad? Like, what? I can't with this man. Anyways. Yeah, apparently secret tomato. Sad alien tomato? I don't know. I'm gonna let me continue, actually. Yeah. Told you it gets crazy. Continue me. Fully into their analytical, perfect mind in a state of what is referred to in the church as going clear. This state was claimed to cure all neuroses and mental illness, as well as even more outlandish claims of increasing one's overall IQ and improving or curing physical ailments like poor eyesight and diabetes. There was no proof of this, of course, and little noticeable results outside of the suggested lightness of being following an intense confessional session. And while an intense therapy session would likely produce the same results, Hubbard was quick to correct anyone that Dianetics was not the same as psychology and should not even be equated with such. This was truly the first concrete example of Hubbard's animosity and antagonism towards professional mental health treatment. Why listen to a trained professional when you could take snake oil in the privacy of your own home and pretend to be well? An underlying source of this animosity may have directly come from an unanswered cry for help in Hubbard's own life. After leaving his commission with the U.S. Navy following continued health issues and an attempt at sabotage on the last ship he served on, Hubbard struggled to make it as a writer on a disability pension from the military. He lived off of his wife's parents and wrote repeatedly to the VA, seeking an increase in his pension. In October 1947, he wrote to the VA requesting psychiatric treatment. Quote, "After trying and failing for 2 years to regain my equilibrium in civil life, I am utterly unable to approach anything like my own competence. My last physician informed me that it might be very helpful if I were to be examined and perhaps treated psychiatrically or even by a psychoanalyst. Towards the end of my service, I avoided, out of pride, any mental examinations, hoping that time would balance a mind which I had every reason to suppose was seriously affected. I could not account for nor rise above long periods of moroseness and suicidal inclinations, and have newly come to realize that I must first triumph above this before I can hope to rehabilitate myself at all. I cannot, myself, afford such treatment. Will you please help me?" Sir, I don't think a full lobotomy would help you at this point. Yeah, ready to farm this out to anybody, like, and that was the thing, is he did need one. He very much needed one because he was very mentally ill, to the point that it becomes very obvious that he was either very severely bipolar or he was very schizophrenic and just was untreated. It screams schizo to me, but we'll get into that later. But I'm like, dude, there's not the Mayo Clinic and every doctor, and Sigmund Freud himself could not help you, sir. Like, there is no amount of Prozac and psychiatric drugs and lithium that will fix whatever is going on in that mashed potato fucking brain. So, yeah, I don't know. Ready to farm this out to anybody else, I guess. Aliens? Why not? Let's continue. So maybe it was this that set Hubbard so against the fields of psychiatry as a whole, but according to his ex-wife Sarah, it was more so the unwavering belief that he and he alone held the cure for all mental illnesses, and that his virtual dismissal by all professional reviews, boards, and journals of psychiatry when attempting to shop around his convoluted process of Dianetics that caused such a break. She also said it was this, plus the constant adulation from fawning adherents who paid no less than $500 a head to be treated and have false memories implanted during Dianetic seminars, that put Hubbard into a dangerously paranoid state of mind. She begged him to get help, and in response, he kidnapped their daughter and fled to Cuba. He left the child there under the care of a mentally impaired woman and her daughter, while at the same time calling his wife to torment her by claiming that he had killed their child and, quote, chopped her up into little pieces. He would then call back and claim the child was alive, and this, according to Sarah, went on and on until she finally acquiesced. He would move to Georgia the following year with his wife, and while there was reportedly associated with a psychiatric clinic. As well he should have been, but probably not for the right reasons. Unfortunately, that is not the only crazy story that came out of Hubbard's marriage to Sarah Northrup. She does also claim that at one point when they were living together, I believe it was in Georgia after this event, that he was working on Dianetics and was typing or whatever in his office, and she was smiling in her sleep. I guess she was dreaming or something. And he went over to her and punched her and slapped her in the face because she was smiling in her sleep. And obviously she was dreaming and thinking about someone else. So yeah, walking trash fire. As anyone who knows me knows very well, I have goals when they invent time machines. And they make them reliable and affordable. I only used to have two things that I wanted to do when they have time machines. I wanted to go back in time and punch a pilgrim directly in the face. They know what they did. And I also wanted to steal a dinosaur. I now have a third thing on that list. I will go back in time and beat the ever-loving righteous shit out of L. Ron Hubbard. Like, curb stomped. On sight. Can't. We'll get into a little bit of the background too of like how they met, and it's a wild ass story. So when we get there, we'll get there. But like, he's still on his hands, throne. Carnation instant hands is what this man's gonna have for breakfast. Anyways, continue me. Any attempts at mental health improvement, though, seemed to fall by the wayside once Dianetics became a massive sensation. But even having a surprise bestseller and going from failed sci-fi pulp novelist to self-help magnate overnight wasn't a lucrative turn initially for Hubbard. Within a few years, the Dianetics fad seemed to have passed and he was back to square one. Only a few loyal adherents to the system remained, and the Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation filed for bankruptcy. But being taken to court and sued for practicing medicine without a license no doubt contributed to the deficit the organization found themselves in. Not one to be on the hook for legal liabilities, Hubbard had divorced himself from the organization shortly before the court case, almost around the same time as he was divorcing himself from his second wife, Sarah, who he had married bigamously. This distancing himself from the legal woes of his former organization did save him from jail time, but he ultimately lost control of the rights to his own work, Dianetics. By 1952, Hubbard was broke again and desperate for a new scheme. Enter the Church of Scientology. While Hubbard was a charlatan in many respects, he did have a mind for business. He also had an interest in the occult, after spending a considerable amount of time in the late 1940s with rocket scientist, black magic practitioner, and student of Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons. The official biography that I want, this man has. Anyways, you heard all of that correctly. Rocket scientist, Jack Parsons is a very famous nuclear physicist. He was part of the Philadelphia Project. A crater on the moon is actually named after him. So very famous in that respect. Also, in his spare time, in his downtime, was into black magic and was a student of Aleister Crowley. So his whole goal, he had this little coven in Pasadena, California, that he would invite people into that were of like-minded ways and such, and that I guess wanted to pursue the darker side of things. His goal was to create the Antichrist. He wanted to sleep with a whole bunch of women to create the Antichrist, as somebody may want to do. Hubbard was his assistant, came in to assist him. You recognize the woman in the middle as Sarah Northrop. Now, Sarah, at the time, was Jack Parsons' girlfriend, and Hubbard ran off with her, stole the man's girlfriend and ran off, and then married her bigamously, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Jack Parsons did end up meeting and marrying this other woman that he was trying to make the Antichrist with. He's an interesting dude in and of himself. So if you ever want to watch something fascinating, this man right here, that one right there with the bomb thing in his hand, fascinating, weird dude, but cool. But yeah, so that's where the whole relationship started off on a weird foot. Plus, Hubbard was still married to his first wife, which apparently he just left out. Didn't disclose. I feel like that's an important detail. Continue. This opened the concept of a mysterious religion to Hubbard, where greater truths are revealed as you ascend spiritual steps. This would be fully rolled into Scientology, where adherents would climb a spiritual ladder, but they would be required to pay increasing fees in order to attain the next level of awakening and consciousness until they would reach the end of the path, as outlined by Dianetics originally. A state of clear was the end game, where one would allegedly become free of all mental illness and neuroses. This, for any practicing Scientologist, is the ultimate and unattainable goal. The proverbial carrot on the stick that keeps believers invested. Hubbard himself would keep revealing new secrets and heights to keep people enthralled, with each new step available to members or operating Thetans. We'll come back to this term, don't worry. Promising new and astounding abilities that border on superpowers. Lower-level Scientologists really do believe and are told that those who operate on the higher levels of Scientology possess preternatural abilities. For example, that high-level operating Thetan and poster boy for Scientology, Tom Cruise, can read minds. You heard that right. Thank you, me, for confirming that I heard that correctly. Yes, that is something that low-level Scientologists are told, that the higher levels you get, which of course come with a exorbitant price tag, you gain abilities. It'll say ability gained on the chart, even on the bridge of total freedom, which is the chart you saw earlier, that you gain these as you get closer to total freedom and to these higher levels. You are able to cure any physical ailments you have. You are able to fucking fly. Like, literally, they think this stuff and they are told this, and that's what drives them to try to get there, is the promise of getting these cool abilities. Plus, I mean, you're already in for a penny and for a pound at this point. You're already a couple, $500,000 invested. I guess you might as well get some bang for your buck at this point. But as you'll see underneath Tom Cruise's name, it does say OT-8. I believe he is OT-8 or OT-7. I might have gotten that wrong. But it's the highest level you can be outside of the leader of the church, David Miscavige. So, they're pretty much peas in a pod at this point. But yeah, it's, why can't he fix that big dumb tooth? I don't know. If everyone's ever looked at Tom Cruise's face, it lines right up. There's just one tooth right in the middle. Right in the middle of his smile. Not a break, not here, here. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. So there's that. So he's basically paid, I don't even want to know how much money, but You do get, once you get that high in the church too, you have access as a celebrity, of course, to all the things that the people that are not celebrities do not have access to. And they do not treat you certain ways that they would treat normal people who are not fucking famous and in Mission Impossible movies. You know, Top Gun, yeah, okay, dude, whatever. Like, it's cool that you get like your own fucking house when you go to Gold Base and they procure girlfriends and wives for you. But maybe don't approve silently of the fact that they basically keep people in slavery. Just, you know, just a tip. I don't know. Throwing that out there. Continue me. And this way of conditioned thinking is par for the course. Most ex-Scientologists say that they got their best and most noticeable results from the early courses, which are a basic melting pot of common sense and mainstream therapeutic ideas, coupled with routines that are specifically designed to induce a slight hypnotic trance. As they increase their Thetan levels and move up the bridge to more advanced courses, the returns significantly diminish, but by then, it's counted on that the member is already highly emotionally and financially invested in the program. They are much less likely to walk away from this investment and, in a twisted self-sabotaging technique, are more likely to blame themselves for their failure to benefit from sessions. These failures, of course, which are addressed by yet another paid course. As the saying goes, once you've already paid for a forgery, the more you are inclined to believe that it is the genuine article. And anyone who has reached OT-3, or Operating Thetan Level 3, or you get to read the space opera that was excoriatingly lampooned by South Park in a controversial episode, has already paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for the privilege of this truth. But we'll get into that later. It's unclear whether Hubbard actually believed in the snake oil he was peddling, but there's no arguing that the marketing genius with which he plied it. Businessmen were told that Scientology helped them get rich, and to gain cultural legitimacy and clout, celebrities were targeted specifically for recruitment. And once a decent Hollywood base developed, the promise of networking would make it easier to recruit fresh blood. And while Scientology was talked about a great deal in the following decades of the 1970s and 1980s, it never reached a large mass of membership. There were approximately 100,000 adherents at its peak, which has diminished significantly to about 30,000 today. Those that remain inside the group are subject to the countless writings of Hubbard, which are considered infallible scripture. He was, after all, while not a successful writer, a prolific one who had a wide range of opinions and feelings on countless trivial topics. A devoted member of the group's so-called Sea Organization, or Sea Org, a paramilitaristic elite group within Scientology whose members signed servitude contracts for 1 billion years, for example, would be ordered to wash cars, but before even I had to pop in for that one. You heard that correctly. So if you guys zoom in on that screen, or if you're able to pull that up and take a look at it, that final sentence in that contract of the Sea Org right there does say that I commit myself to 1 billion years servitude. They sign themselves away for 1 billion years. And they make 40 cents a day. And they are worked for 30 hours at a time. They are allowed to sleep for 3. They do manual labor. They are punished pretty severely when they do not fulfill their duties. You are not allowed to have children while you are in the Sea Org, because according to one of his many memos, which please do go back and read those, they're called flag orders. Do go back and read those because they're a pip. According to the manual for the Sea Org is not set up to accommodate children. So multiple women have said that they were forced to have abortions because they were serving in the Sea Org at the time. Children are also taken away from Sea Org members. So if you do happen to have children and you join, they are taken to the cadet org and you don't really have any contact with your children anymore. This is real. This is real, you guys. Really fucking real. So this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about when I say Well, I'm sure it's nice for celebrities when they cover up your messes and they give you houses and penthouses and trick out your cars and do everything for you. This is the other shit that goes on. Maybe don't turn a blind eye to that. Just saying. Anyways, continue me. Near a bucket of water must read, memorize, and be quizzed on Hubbard's policy letter outlining the, quote, correct way to wash a car. And while that may seem superfluous or even comical, many of the other policies have proven to be quite problematic. In Science of Survival, published in 1951, Hubbard laid out his tone scale of human emotions. This is a scale displaying a wide range of human emotions, each one equated to a numeric value. The more positive emotions, at least according to Hubbard, rate highest on the scale, while negative emotions like anger, grief, and apathy rate at lower or negative values. These negative or low frequency numbers are what is considered to be treatable and curable by the program, which sounds relatively harmless until one realizes that Hubbard equated homosexuality with, quote, covert hostility, a low number on the tone scale, which implies that Dianetic processing could cure or treat this, quote, harmful condition. The rhetoric remains foundational scripture despite big-name science. Hate to interrupt me for a second, but that's the tone scale. So the other one you saw with the little cute little fuzzy graphics on it, you know, how cute, mascots. That's the tone scale. So those are the numbers that are assigned to different emotions. The higher the number, the more positive emotions. So you can see the serenity of beingness, whatever the fuck that means, is a 40, where covert hostility is a 1.1. And that is the number, and that is the condition that Hubbard associated with homosexuality. The religion is notoriously homophobic, to the point that there were certain branches of Scientology in California when Prop 8 was going around for gay marriage that went against it, that put money against Prop 8. They've harassed gay members. They have blackmailed members that are gay and that are not out of the closet. What about this seems appealing to anybody? Also, I would like to point out that the ones that are circled here on the tone scale, if you'll notice, sympathy is towards the bottom, where if you don't have sympathy, that actually, it's still negative, but it's higher. What does that tell you about an organization where being empathetic and sympathetic to people is actually worse than being a sociopathic monster? Just let that sink in. Continue me. Scientology celebrities like John Travolta's efforts to find more progressive and nuanced quotes. The group tends to downplay their founder's homophobia, which might have contributed significantly to his son Quentin's suicide in 1976. Yet Hubbard is lauded by his faithful followers as a divine being, and he did little to dissuade or disabuse this notion. Nothing less than total loyalty was expected, especially when it came to adherence to policies like the, quote, disconnection of suppressive persons, fair game, or the group's contentious and controversial approach to treatment of psychiatric disorders. One of the shortcomings that directly led to the death of member Lisa McPherson. Because you see, psychiatric treatment within the group is not permitted. After asking for help in the form of counseling, the paramedics at the scene of McPherson's minor traffic accident decided to take her to the hospital. Hospital staff agreed that she was physically in no harm, but recommended keeping her overnight for observation. Shortly after her admission to the hospital, no less than 8 members of the church arrived at the hospital and intervened in the situation on McPherson's behalf. They spoke to her and staff for some time, and after this, Lisa McPherson refused psychiatric care or observation and checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice. She was then taken by Scientology handlers to the Fort Harrison Hotel, a headquarters for the church in downtown Clearwater, Florida, also known as the Flag Land Base. Here, she was placed under the, quote, religious care of the FSO, or Flag Service Organization. The mock naval names of varying branches of Scientology mirror that of Hubbard's own military career in the Navy, which was hardly glorious, the highlight of which was when he shelled Mexico by mistake. But the organizational appeal of the structure and the name stuck with Hubbard, who carried it over to the internal organizations within Scientology. It was here, under the care of the FSO, that McPherson was supposedly brought in for, quote, rest and relaxation. Or at least that's what the church later claimed. Other sworn statements by witnesses, however, state that she was brought in for a procedure that the group calls a, quote, introspection rundown. An introspection rundown is yet another controversial internal policy set within the church, defined by Hubbard himself in no less than 3 separate technical bulletins. In pure base definition, it is an auditing process meant to handle a psychotic episode or total mental breakdown. The introspection portion seems harmless enough, the purpose behind it intending the subject to ultimately extrovert an introverted person via auditing, until they are no longer looking inwardly without end. The problems with this, however, begin with a total isolation of the subject, where no one attending them is allowed to speak to them at all outside of auditing sessions. The mentally vulnerable subject is then kept completely alone, with no external sound or contact from anyone. In order to determine the end period of the imposed isolation, which again is intended to somehow help a person with intrusive thoughts, the person in charge of the isolated subject's case will write the subject a note, such as, Dear Joe, what can you guarantee me if you are let out of isolation? If the answer is determined to show continued irresponsibility or irrationality, the supervisor must write back something along the lines of, quote, Dear Joe, I'm sorry, but it's a no-go on coming out of isolation yet, and then we'll include the reasons why not. Once it is determined that the person is fully out of psychosis and up to the responsibility of living with others, their isolation is ended. Hubbard claimed this to be, quote, nothing short of miraculous, and that, quote, the last reason to have psychiatry around was gone. That's not how it turned out for Lisa McPherson. And this wouldn't be the first time that the law turned its attention to Scientology. From the early 1950s, after the forming of the church, once it was clear to Hubbard that he could make an abundant income off of people paying for courses, not only did he continue to add more levels to the courses and procedure to go clear, but the church also petitioned the IRS for tax-exempt status. Had to wait for a good break in me talking, because I talk a lot. So there's all full of closets, absolutely full of closets. So does that sound right to you? His claim of like, wow, this is such a breakthrough. We don't need psychiatry anymore. And I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not supposed to isolate a person who is having a mental breakdown and just lock them in a room and not talk to them. How does that help? How is that any kind of helpful at all? Let's not give them counseling. Let's not talk it out or let them communicate somehow. No, you are not allowed to touch them, talk to them outside of auditing sessions. They were refused food, they were refused contact, they were refused liquids. How does this help somebody who is mentally fragile? How is this a breakthrough? It sounds like torture. It sounds like something somebody does in a prison camp when you're trying to get someone to talk. So there's that. I don't know about breakthrough, dude. No, none of that seems like a breakthrough to me. Continue me. According to his ex-wife Sarah, Hubbard had always stated that creating a religion was the best way to make money that the government couldn't get their hands on. The IRS initially granted tax-exempt status, but revoked it in 1958 due to what was called private inurement, or the use of tax-exempt monies to benefit a non-tax-exempt individual or entity, primarily L. Ron Hubbard himself and his family. This did not sit well with Hubbard, who was becoming increasingly paranoid about what he presumed were external threats to Scientology coming from everywhere. And maybe he wasn't entirely wrong. The IRS sent agents after Hubbard in the late 1960s for tax evasion. He would flee the States at this time, taking to the seas with his newly created Scientology naval fleet, the Sea Organization. The FBI also had an extensive file on Hubbard, and the FDA had taken action against various medical claims that Scientology had been making, plus pills and quack cures that they were selling. These actions resulted in Scientology gaining an increasingly unfavorable reputation across the world. A report in 1965 led to Scientology actually being banned in Western and South Australia. The UK took action against the group as well, and Hubbard himself was declared a, quote, undesirable alien by the country, and a ban on any foreign Scientologists entering the country was placed. Hubbard did not react well to this and created 3 major new initiatives in the face of these growing challenges. Ethics technology was introduced in order to tighten internal discipline within Scientology, as Hubbard himself continued to become increasingly paranoid and saw external threats everywhere, and imagined that saboteurs had infiltrated his group en masse. This new policy was a set of punishments for any perceived infractions and included, quote, disconnecting from individuals and organizations, including family members, who were deemed to be suppressive persons, or, in layman's terms, those who questioned the doctrine and practices of Scientology and did not support it. Members were also required to write KRs, or knowledge reports, in the traditions of the Salem witch trials, where they would report on each other for any misapplication of Scientology methods or transgressions. Finally, the infamous fair game policy was introduced, which stated that anyone deemed an enemy of Scientology, quote, may be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologists. They may be tricked, sued, or lied to, or destroyed, unquote. This could include, but was not limited to, legal actions, erroneous and tedious lawsuits. So I need to address that really quick. And yes, a Navy poly. And they do wear uniforms, which is really weird. So the fair game policy is the famous one that what people were subject to for decades. Those were the ones that they would go after people. They would threaten to sue. They would just basically bombard people with legal action until they retracted their statement or whatever it is they had to say. You can see here, this is a policy letter that came out in 1968 that claimed it was a cancellation of the fair game policy. So they were saying basically the practice of doing that is canceled. We're not doing that anymore. And you can't write that down. But as you can see on the notes here, I encourage you to pause it and read them. Basically, the title says, refers to so they'll make a claim that says, oh, well, we don't do that anymore. That was a thing, and we stopped doing that in the late 60s. Lies. You can see where it says they say they don't declare people anymore. They don't use the term fair game anymore, which is basically a semantics thing. The main purpose, the fair game policy, was a PR disaster. It blew up and looked bad. And as you can see, it says it caused bad public relations. That's the primary reason behind canceling it and not doing it anymore, was it made them look bad. So as you can see, it says the PL does not cancel any policy on the treatment or handling of an SP, which basically means that it's still going. So the whole point of this document is we're canceling fair game. We still do it. We just don't call it that anymore. So when anyone calls us out on it and says, hey, what about that fair game thing? We can go, well, there's a document that says we don't do it anymore. They do it. They just don't call it that. Semantics. Continue. Me. And being harassed, stalked, and followed by private investigators for years on end. There are multiple cases and instances where individuals claim to have had their property destroyed, pets harmed, families followed simply for writing articles in attempts to expose the inner workings of the organization or for leaving the church. Many ex-members claim to have been subject to this abuse for decades after leaving. At the beginning of March 1966, Hubbard created the Guardian's Office, which was headed by his third and more recent wife, Mary Sue. It would deal with all the external affairs of the Church of Scientology, including public relations, legal actions, and the gathering of intelligence on perceived threats. And as Scientology continued to face increasing negative media attention, the Guardian office responded in kind with hundreds of writs claiming libel and slander, issuing more than 40 writs in a single day. Hubbard ordered his staff to find, quote, lurid blood sex crime actual evidence on Scientology's attackers, unquote. And no one was exempt from this campaign of terror, not even governmental organizations in the United States and abroad. In 1973, Hubbard wrote Guardian Order 732, which called for the removal and correction of erroneous Scientology files. He believed that Scientology was being attacked by an international Nazi conspiracy, which he termed the Tenyaka Memorial, through a network of drug companies, banks, and psychiatrists in a bid to take over the world. He instigated the, quote, Snow White program, more commonly known as Operation Snow White, and directed the Guardian office to remove negative reports about Scientology from government files and to track down their sources. The GO was ordered to get all false and secret files on Scientology, LRH, that cannot be obtained legally by the possible lines of approach, i.e. job penetration, janitor penetration, and suitable guises utilizing covers. His involvement in the GO's operations was concealed through the use of code names. The GO carried out covert campaigns on Hubbard's behalf, such as Operation Bulldozer Leak and Operation Freakout, intended to, quote, effectively spread the rumor that will lead government, media, and individual suppressive persons to conclude that LRH has no control over the Church of Scientology and no legal liability for church activity. He was kept informed of GO operations such as the theft of medical records from a hospital, harassment of psychiatrists, and infiltrations of organizations that had been critical of Scientology at various times, such as the Better Business Bureau, the American Medical Association, and the American Psychiatric Association. Members of the GO infiltrated and burglarized numerous government organizations, including the U.S. Department of Justice and the Internal Revenue Service. After 2 GO agents were caught in the Washington, D.C. headquarters of the IRS, the FBI carried out simultaneous raids on GO offices in both Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. on July 7, 1977. They retrieved wiretap equipment, burglary tools, and some 90,000 pages of incriminating documents. Hubbard was not prosecuted, though he was labeled an unindicted co-conspirator by government prosecutors. His wife, Mary Sue, was indicted and was subsequently convicted of conspiracy. She was sent to a federal prison along with 10 other high-ranking Scientologists. One of the main reasons for Hubbard being listed as an unindicted co-conspirator was solely for the fact that he had gone deep into hiding in an attempt to avoid his mounting legal troubles. This was also a major raison d'etre for pioneering the Sea Org. 3 ships were obtained and established as a fleet on an 8-year mission of sailing from port to port in the Mediterranean, from Corfu all the way to the Azores, rarely staying in one place for more than 6 weeks. Hubbard claimed to have spent past lives in the area around the Mediterranean and felt himself spiritually drawn to this area, but, as always, a much more functional reason was likely the true cause. Ken Urquhart, Hubbard's personal assistant at the time, later recalled, quote, before we get into that quote, can we just appreciate the fact that this motherfucker thinks he's the skipper from Gilligan's Island? What in the actual shit biscuits? What is that? What is this? Sir, excuse me. It's a good thing he had 3 ships because he needs it to carry that much fucking audacity around. He's lucky he wasn't dishonorably discharged because he accidentally shelled Mexico, as I mentioned earlier. He was not so good with the Navy thing. Not so good at it. But yeah, apparently thought he was, because he couldn't attain any higher rank, which is, of course, up for debate in Scientology. He couldn't get anything higher than a lieutenant. So he got to play out his Navy cosplay Commodore fantasy Gilligan's Island bullshit with the Sea Org. So there you go. Continue, Captain Dipshit. Hubbard said we had to keep moving because there were so many people after him. If they caught up with him, they would cause him so much trouble that he would be unable to continue his work. Scientology would not get into the world, and there would be social and economic chaos, if not a nuclear holocaust." Unquote. With the Sea Org established, Hubbard claimed in public that he had stepped away from the leadership and management of the church, but witnesses at the time claimed that nothing could have been further from the truth. He received daily telex communications that kept him apprised of the activities and income of Scientology organizations all around the world, and that the church sent Hubbard $15,000 a week, over $116,000 in 2020 money, and millions of dollars were transferred into his bank accounts in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. All the while, Hubbard continued to seek out, quote, "a safe haven in a friendly little country where Scientology would be allowed to prosper." Needless to say, Scientology and Hubbard's reputation tended to precede them wherever they went, and they were never permitted to stay in one country for too long before being officially asked to leave. In 1969, he was formally asked to leave Greece after attempting to establish a philosophy school, and the same in Morocco in 1972. All the while, Hubbard continued to develop Scientology doctrines. After all, why have an end to a paid path of ascendance when more enlightenment and cash flow awaited around the corner? A Scientology biography of Hubbard claims at this time, quote, "free of organizational duties and aided by the first Sea Org members, L. Ron Hubbard now had the time and facilities to confirm in the physical universe some of the events and places he had encountered in his journeys down the track of time," unquote. Which is a flowery way of saying that he had much more free time for writing fiction. In 1965, Hubbard decided to designate several existing Scientology courses as confidential and repackage them as the first of the new and esoteric OT levels. OT stands for Operating Thetan Levels, which according to the Church of Scientology is a spiritual state beyond clear. To break this down even further, Scientology defines the term thetan as something similar to a spirit or soul, but is not entirely the same. Scientologists believe that it is the thetan, not the brain or central nervous system, that controls the body through communication points. The levels of operating thetan are described within Scientology as a state of godliness, and that those who ascend to them will have supernatural control over, quote, matter, energy, space, and time. Hubbard claimed that Thetans were tricked into following religions which prevented them from using their true power to create and destroy universes. 2 years after rolling out the initial OT levels, Hubbard introduced the controversial and widely lampooned OT-3 level called Wall of Fire, where he describes an immense disaster that had occurred, quote, on this planet and on the 75 other planets which formed this confederacy 75 million years ago, unquote. Scientologists are required to take the first 2 OT levels before being invited to view this, quote, secret doctrine, which is contained in a locked briefcase and are handwritten notes by Hubbard himself. These notes reveal that in a distant system, part of a galactic confederacy, existed many planets that were very similar in lifestyle and appearance to 1950s Earth. These planets suffered from terrible overpopulation, and in their strife chose an evil overlord named Xenu to rule them. Xenu's answer to this issue of overpopulation was to trap and put large portions of the people who existed on these planets into a deep freeze. These frozen prisoners were then loaded aboard spacecraft which, quote, looked exactly like DC-8 aircraft and transported to a prison planet, Earth. It was here that their frozen bodies were dumped into volcanoes in Hawaii, and then A-bombs were dropped on the volcanoes to kill them, because apparently dropping mortal beings into volcanoes isn't enough to smoke them. Xenu wanted to be double sure. When the souls of the murdered prisoners began to float upwards into the sky, Xenu did not wish them to be able to return to their homes, so with the use of large floating devices called soul catchers, which had also been built on Earth, he captured the souls of the victimized aliens and took them to a processing center, where they were shown hours and hours of footage that brainwashed them and filled them with false beliefs and memories in order to make them forget their powers and who they were. The The brainwashed souls were then released from the implant stations and wandered confused around the earth before finding primitive humans to attach themselves to. According to Hubbard, these brainwashed souls are the source of all our fears, neuroses, and limitations. To move from OT2 to OT3 alone costs over $8,000. This does not take into account the payments for previous courses and levels. The cumulative cost of this knowledge, that alien souls are why you are sad, runs into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. What? What? Why? Guys, that is literally OT3. That is literally what you pay several $100,000 to find out. That alien souls make you sad. What kind of science fiction? What kind of fucking aliens versus predator fucking bullshit? It's not even good science fiction. I could forgive it if it was good, but it's not good. It's terrible and stupid. And there are so many fucking holes in it that I can't even. If the plot holes, mama, I can't. So, okay. So instead of just vaporizing people because of overpopulation, you decided to go the extra step and freeze them and put them on aircraft or spaceships and take them somewhere else because that doesn't cost space money. That's dumb. Then you go to another planet, drop them in a volcano, and then drop A-bombs on them again because dropping things into a volcano isn't apparently enough to fucking kill them. You need to nuke them too. Cool. Then you went the extra step of building soul catchers on another planet that you don't even fucking live on because you knew where you were going to do this. Catch their souls in these little alien dream catchers and hoard them into a building where they were forced, Clockwork Orange style, to watch videos that melts their brains. Then they are let out into the wild and they found cave people, and that is why you have bipolar disorder. Bullshit. Bullshit. So, that aside, can you guys imagine? So, like, the entry levels of Scientology are fairly innocuous. They're basically like self-help stuff of like, hey, we can like teach you how to be a better person or how to be happier or blah, blah, blah. Can you imagine if they started with this bullshit, if they started out the gate with alien souls are why you're sad, no one would fucking join. Everyone would leave. But people are so invested by that point that they're like, well, I guess I've spent this much money. If I went into, guys, I'm sorry, this is going to be a longer episode. If I went into a room and I had paid $500,000 for some secret knowledge and these motherfuckers open a briefcase and hand me space opera, Harry Potter fan fiction, everyone in that room is meeting Sky Daddy that day. No question. That's it. I'm taking that entire room with me. You want to see Xenu so bad? Bitches, we're going to meet him right now. I can't. Continue me. The discovery of OT-3 was said to have taken a drastic physical toll on Hubbard, who claimed he had broken a knee, his arm, and his back during the course of his research. A year later, in 1968, he unveiled the OT levels 4 to 6 and began delivering these advanced courses aboard his flagship, the Royal Scotsman. The revelations of these new courses, plus the glamorous picture presented of life in the elite Sea Org, lured many Scientologists around the world to join Hubbard aboard his private fleet. But the reality was much different than what they had been promised. Most of those who joined had little to no nautical experience whatsoever, and according to those aboard, the conditions on the ships were appalling. The crew was worked to the point of exhaustion, given meager rations, and forbidden to wash or change their clothes for weeks on end. Hubbard maintained a harsh disciplinary regime on the ship, punishing any transgressions or mistakes by confining people in the ship's bilge tanks without access to bathroom facilities and food served in slop buckets. Other times, crew members were thrown overboard with Hubbard watching and occasionally filming the punishments. David Mayo, a Sea Org member at the time, later recalled, quote, "We tried not to think too hard about his behavior. It was not rational much of the time, but to even consider such a thing was a discreditable thought, and you couldn't allow yourself to have a discreditable thought. One of the questions in a security check was, have you ever had any unkind thoughts about LRH? And you could get into very serious trouble if you had, so you tried hard not to," unquote. During the 1970s, Hubbard faced increasing legal challenges, including ones from the French government for fraud and customs violations. These charges forced him to leave the Sea Org for a time and live incognito in Queens, New York, until the threat of being extradited ended. The narrative that is spread in the church is not one of Hubbard ducking legal charges, but that he was in New York City conducting a, quote, sociological study. With his health in severe decline from chain smoking and bursitis, as well as a heart attack in 1975, plus the additional problematic factors of his fleet of ships becoming increasingly unwelcome, banned, and unable to dock in ports around Europe, Hubbard decided it was time to establish a land base for the Sea Org in Florida. Clearwater was the place decided on, much to the chagrin of the locals as well as the local government. The invasion of this small but prepossessed group of self-improvement charlatans tipped the balance of normal life in the sleepy coastal town. The Fort Harrison Hotel was secretly acquired as the location for the land base in 1975, and 20 years later, it would be the scene of a woman's untimely death. Lisa McPherson had been deprived of contact with others for nearly 17 days since her discharge from a local Clearwater hospital. Her care logs coldly narrate the last days of her life. She was described as being incoherent and that she had bruised her feet and fists from slamming them into the walls repeatedly. Her nails had to be trimmed in order to keep her from scratching herself. She was given natural supplements and even the drug chloral hydrate to help her sleep, but it was clear that her condition was rapidly declining. Staffers overseeing McPherson claimed she refused protein shakes and any food that was offered to her. At one point, a force feed was attempted, but she spat the food out. She was suffering from malnourishment and appeared very weak, and on many days did not move at all. Church staffers who pointed out McPherson's precarious condition were told to, quote, butt out. On December 5th, 1995, staffers contacted Dr. David Minkoff, a Scientologist and a physician who had previously prescribed both Valium and chloral hydrate to Lisa McPherson without a physical examination. They requested that he prescribe her antibiotics because she seemed to have some kind of infection. One staffer reported that McPherson, quote, looked ill and like she had chicken pox or measles all over her face. Some of these lesions would later be shown in a post-mortem examination to have been cockroach bites. Minkoff refused to prescribe the drugs and instead said that she needed to be taken to a hospital and that for the first time he actually needed to examine her before prescribing anything. Her caretakers objected, fearful that McPherson would be placed in involuntary psychiatric care once taken to a hospital, but finally acquiesced. Lisa McPherson, meanwhile, was non-responsive and had been for nearly 24 to 48 hours. Dr. Janice Johnson, a senior medical officer at the Fort Harrison base who was assigned to care for McPherson, stated that while en route to a hospital, the patient was experiencing labored breathing and was gasping for air. However, despite these obvious signs of distress, the escort passed 4 hospitals on their way to their destination where Minkoff worked. By the time they arrived at the hospital, a 45-minute drive north of Clearwater, Lisa McPherson showed no vital signs. The hospital staff attempted to resuscitate her for 20 minutes before declaring her dead on arrival. She was 36 years old. Scientologists quickly called McPherson's family to inform them that she had died of, quote, meningitis or a blood clot while under rest and relaxation at Fort Harrison. A suspicious death investigation was undertaken, and an autopsy was performed the next day. The findings showed in the initial examination that the cause of death was, quote, a thromboembolism of the left pulmonary artery caused by bed rest and severe dehydration. The manner of death was ruled, however, as undetermined, despite the emaciated appearance of the body. Medical examiner Joan Woods stated that, quote, McPherson's condition had deteriorated slowly and that she had likely gone without fluids for 5 to 10 days. Scientology, never one to suffer any negative press, even in the case of a wrongful death, threatened to sue medical examiner Wood in order to gain access to her files, as well as blood, tissue, and organ samples that had been taken during the autopsy. They then hired their own team of medical examiners and forensic pathologists, including the famous Dr. Michael Baden and Dr. Cyril Wecht, who have both been involved in countless high-profile court cases. They both determined that McPherson died suddenly and unpredictably of a blood clot that had ended up in her left lung from a knee injury sustained in the original automobile accident. Other findings included research on compounds known as ketones, which people produce when they are dehydrated, starving, or even fasting. Tests of McPherson's bodily fluids showed no ketones, according to the pathologists. A church-hired expert on body measurement compared autopsy photos of McPherson with those taken shortly before the accident. The expert concluded that from the photographs there was, quote, no appreciable weight loss, countering the prosecution's view that McPherson had lost from anywhere from 20 to 40 pounds while in Scientology's care. A report by Morton Plant Hospital doctor and church officials who saw McPherson just before she entered the Fort Harrison Hotel, stating that McPherson was already thin with protruding cheekbones. A report by Robert D. Davis, the pathologist who initially conducted the autopsy for Wood's office, concluded that McPherson's body was of a natural nutritional status. And medical literature and sworn testimony gathered by the church that says it proves the eye fluid samples were improperly handled by Wood's office, incompetently tested at an independent lab, and ultimately contaminated. The prosecution's response was that the chain of custody of evidence was never broken. This was also corroborated by the Assistant State Attorney Douglas Crow's memo to State Attorney Bernie McCabe. Due to the vitreous fluid tests, Baden and Wecht maintained that McPherson was dehydrated. Chemical pathologists Calvin Bant and Werner Spitz concurred with the initial coroner's report in their affidavits. Witness for the prosecution, Dr. Alan Wu, also testified that ketones need not be present for dehydration in a special case like McPherson's, where she was fed proteins and therefore didn't create measurable ketones. The plaintiffs maintained that McPherson did lose water weight to result in her post-mortem weight of 108 pounds. In light of the new scientific evidence provided by Scientology, a review was mandated by the policy manual, which states that the medical examiner will, quote, readdress key issues in a case if credible new evidence is presented, regardless of its source. After the review, Wood changed the cause of death from undetermined to an accident. She traced McPherson's pulmonary embolism to her psychosis and the auto accident as major factors. Wood's review caused the review and dismissal of a criminal case concerning McPherson's death, but for many that wasn't good enough. A civil suit was brought forth and eventually settled out of court. Protests even continued to take place outside the Fort Harrison Hotel on the anniversary of Lisa McPherson's death. Many feel the church and its inept and callous handling of a woman's mental breakdown did indeed cost her life, but there was not enough substantial evidence to bring criminal charges. That, and the deep pockets and destroy all enemies methodology of Scientology, would prove fatal to most cases against them. But while Hubbard himself had instituted these policies early on, there was one of his faithful who took them to terrifying new abusive levels, and would carry the church into the modern day to do battle with anyone who stood in the way of their ambition for growth, revenue, and expansion. Enter David Miscavige. Bam! Left you on a cliffhanger. So there's a lot more, guys. There's a lot more because the church while under Hubbard was one thing, but the church while under David Miscavige is a total other beast. So I needed to cover them separately. And then, of course, Lisa McPherson's death is not the only suspicious death that has occurred within Scientology. There have been multiple other ones, also instances of people committing suicide within the church that are covered up. But I wanted to give you guys a good foundation for when we get into the second part, which is all the modern stuff up till now when people started to leave and all of this stuff started to come out. Thank you so much, guys. This one was a lot. I am so sorry it took so long to get done, but there was a lot of material. That video right there, the one you just watched, took me 14 hours to put together and edit. That's just the video. That's not even counting the audio track, the research, the notes, the everything else. So wait till the next one because it's crazy too. I know it's going to be hard to top throwing aliens into a volcano and then bombing them crazy, but it gets intense. It gets intense. Thank you guys so much. Does anyone have any questions regarding anything you saw? Again, a lot of the forms, I'm unfortunate, those were actual forms. Those are actual scans of real paperwork and real documents. So I do advise if you're able to go in and zoom in on them to go read them and look them up, as I know I can't sit there and just hold on them for a while, but they're freaking bananas. There was literally like a flag order for everything. Thank you guys so much. And thank you to the guys who donated to me because it helps me keep doing what I do and helps me keep doing research and helps me pay for things. I don't know, Daniel. They may not. I mean, they've obviously, their membership is really severely dropped. There's only about 30,000 active members now currently. So as opposed to 100,000 at their peak. So maybe there's going to be basically a breaking point where they're going to come to an issue of they're going to get, once they get like basically the whole David versus Goliath thing with Scientology is going to be removing their tax exempt status. So it's, once that happens, they're going to, they can't afford it. They just can't afford to continue, even with celebrities as part of it. So that's what people are working on. People are looking at trying to get the FBI involved in these allegations of abuse, allegations of separation, allegations of criminal activities. So it's going to take interference and intervention from the government to get this done. If you guys are interested, please do watch. There's a documentary by Lawrence Wright called Going Clear that is on HBO. There's also Leah Remini, Scientology in the Aftermath, which is on A&E. And her and Mike Rinder, who was the PR guy for Scientology for 30 years, he left in 2009. They do a podcast called Fair Game. So I suggest listening to it if you guys are interested in further information on that. But look forward to part 2. I will try to get it to you as quickly and expeditiously as possible. Faster than an evil alien overlord puts frozen people in an airship. Or tries to. Or something. That's fucking ridiculous. I still can't. Like, that South Park episode, I was like, when I watched it the first time, I was like, no fucking way. No way. No fucking way. Thank you guys. Thank you guys so much. If you have any questions that I haven't got to, I'm trying to watch the chat here. Or if you think of something, feel free to DM me, rewatch it as many times as you want, share the video, share it out, get the word out there. I appreciate you guys and everything you do. It is my joy to not only educate as well as horrify. That is my lot in life. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. I never ask for anything other than that you guys like, subscribe, share the video out, get as many people to watch it as possible, bring traffic to the channel, and let's get the word out there that, yeah, some people are weird. Like, should not be a thing in a religion. It's not a thing. Alien souls. Wow. Never knew that. So thank you guys so much. I will see you guys next time. Stay spooky. Don't join a cult and try not to get murdered. Please. Thanks, guys.